A single spark. That's all it takes.
By 10 o'clock at night, you could see the flames up the hills. By 4 in the morning, this whole hillside, all these mountains. The skies were redder than I've ever seen before.
Every summer, the fires come. And every year, they're hotter, faster, and harder to stop.
This fire is a result of literally a spark that traveled 3.8 kilometers across the lake. Mind-boggling.
Homes burn, highways close, families flee. But this crisis didn't come out of nowhere.
We can draw some parallels with California as well. With our forest, the trees got older, more impacted by disease and insects, and the fuel was thicker. So when the fires happened, they would become mega fires.
So how do we become more fire resistant in a province that has over 55 million hectares of forest?
I grew up in a small town and I spent most of my time in the outdoors. It was just kind of a natural fit for me to have a job where I got to spend time in the forest and working with trees. I had a wide variety of jobs. I started off on a helitack crew, then I worked on a rappel crew. I supervised logging, I supervised tree planting, I developed areas for harvesting. It's a very peaceful time when you're in the forest, and I've always enjoyed that, where you're walking around and it's changing all the time. Different forests, different types. You see animals, sometimes you run into bears. When I look at the wildfire impacts that have happened over the last number of years, I just saw that we were continuing not to move on. We were still saying if a fire happens, we react to it instead of getting in front of it. So I just looked and said active forest management, or managing our forests, is a way to reduce fires so we don't have to put them all out. Let's stop them before they start. You know, a few years ago I had ash fall on my house from the White Rock Lake fire. So very personal side for me. It really has motivated me, you know, that we can address it. We can reduce the fires. We can make a difference.
Well, here we are leaving the roundabout. I can feel the heat here.
Hundreds of people have been ordered to evacuate.
There was no stopping it. Nothing a single human or a million humans could do to stop that fire from coming south.
Since 2017, 7.4 million hectares of BC's forest have burned, an area almost 2.5 times the size of Vancouver Island. And conditions on the ground are only making things worse.
Our forests are way more receptive now to wildfire. I often hear stories from people that, you know, why don't you just put them out when they're smaller? Why can't we just get on them quicker? Well, we do. We've evolved our organization significantly around technology and people and the way we fight fire. But the reality is there's 94 million hectares of Crown land that we look after. For us to be able to get to every fire quick enough to suppress it and keep it at a small size is almost impossible on those extreme days. So if we've had drought and a heat dome for weeks on end, we may see upwards of 150 new starts across the province in one single storm. And so we do respond as quickly as possible, but it's almost a losing battle in some cases given the conditions that we're faced with what the conditions of the forest are giving us.
As a result of climate change, years of built-up forest fuel, and reduced land management, we're now seeing fires unlike anything in our history. Bigger, faster, more destructive megafires.
You talk to some old-time loggers or contractors or people that have worked in the woods, and even some of our veteran, very experienced fire people, operational people, and they've never seen fire behavior like we're seeing in the last 5 years.
Fires are always going to be in British Columbia. They're never going to disappear. But what we can do is reduce the size of them. So instead of spending all of our time on suppressing fires, we need to get in front of them and work on how to make the forest more resilient to fire. Think of fire as a triangle that needs fuel, oxygen, and heat. So If we get a hot summer, we really can't control that. If we get oxygen, think of your campfire and the wind blows on it, fans it up, it's tough for us to control that. The one factor that we can influence and have some control on is fuel. And that's what we need to do. We need to manage the fuel to reduce wildfires.
We've been putting out fires since Smokey the Bear came on the scene in 1908.
Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
In 40 years of my experience in BC's forest industry, our forests have changed completely at all levels, in the valley bottoms all the way up to the top of the mountains. We're sitting in a pine stand, all the pine's dead and fallen over. Now we have 70 tons per hectare of dead pine on the ground, which if and when it burns is going to devastate the site and turn it into a grassland and probably not grow trees again.
A lot of these stands were meant to have had a couple fires already, but because we live in such a narrow window and we've been putting fires out for years, everyone just assumes this is how this forest should have looked all the time. Well, that's not necessarily how it would have looked had it had a couple of low entry burns, early on in the rotation or the cereal stage.
They're overstocked. There's too many trees. They're out competing each other. And when they compete, trees die. Now we have these dead, dry fuels in our forest ecosystems. 90 years of constant fire suppression. We've allowed our fuels to build up. We've got 10 times more fuel now than we ever had before. Now we got these huge, big bonfires going on, which kills all the trees. Nothing survives. And the soil don't survive, the microbes don't survive, the site's sterilized. And probably won't grow trees again maybe for decades. These fires are far more intense and far more dangerous, and we're losing homes, we're losing communities because of it. Lots of choices, but the key is reduce the intensity of fires by reducing the fuels. So that maybe opening the stands up, maybe it's surface fuel cleanups, maybe it's removing these ladder fuels, some of these younger trees that allow the fire to climb into the tops of the crowns. Overall intensity of the fire will decrease with decreased number of trees and fuels, which mean we have good suppression opportunities. We can actually fight these fires in these stands, and chance these trees actually living is dramatically higher.
When I started working in their forests, it seemed like we were always dealing with forest health issues. There was a large mountain pine beetle outbreak for decades. That was our focus.
More than 60 million acres of forest have been killed by pine beetles in North America.
Heavily colonized trees die within a few weeks. But from the air, there is no sign of death until late the following spring, when normal green is displaced by a light yellow foliage.
They were high-risk areas, and we harvested a lot of them and reduced the fire risk. After the mountain pine beetle was significantly addressed, the harvest level in the province was reduced, and it continues to be reduced. We're harvesting half of the volume, half of the area that we did just going back to 2017. When we reduce the harvest level, that means that management doesn't take place on a significant portion of our forests. So that fuel load increases, the age of the trees increase, and our fire risk increases.
But in many places, well-intentioned policies aimed at protecting scenery or wildlife have unintentionally allowed fuel to build up, creating dangerous fire conditions.
One big thing is by regulation, we've constrained harvesting around communities. We have things called visual quality objectives, mule deer winter range. They said we don't want to see any harvesting around communities. And the result of that policy has really endangered communities because now we have much more fuel, much thicker, it's much more dangerous. So we need to change that.
For decades, BC's forest health has been under pressure, and pests are a big part of the story. The mountain pine beetle outbreak exploded in the 1990s, devastating over 18 million hectares, 1/3 of BC's forest. It left behind vast strands of dead timber, fueling wildfire risk across the province.
So under the bark, which comes up really easy now, well, it's somewhat easy. It's called a parent gallery. It was formed by one male and one female mountain pine beetle. Kills the tree and stains with that bluish black color. And as the tree dies, We call this checking. You get splits in the wood. So then it reduces the end product that you can use the tree for. So once a tree is killed by the beetle, if you want to use it, it's good to log it fairly rapidly after. It died many years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago it died. You know, we've even looked in the fossil records. There's always been mountain pine beetle and these outbreaks, some very large, some not so large. The outbreak, the most recent one, it started in the late 1990s. And that was so large, it ran through literally every mature pine stand in the province.
We're still dealing with this massive fuel loading from the pine beetle. This material here has got another 15, 20 years of volatility in it, and it's not going away.
More recently, the spruce budworm is defoliating vast areas of forest across southern and central BC.
Last year, I believe there was about 200,000 hectares that was visibly defoliated just in the Thompson-Okanagan region, about 300,000 provincially. And I would imagine that we're probably fourfold over that now. So it can spread over vast areas really quickly. So that's what I call a large outbreak.
Across BC, vast swaths of forest have been left dry and brittle. Where beetle-killed pine and budworm damaged Douglas fir now stand like oversized kindling, ready to ignite with the next spark.
These fir stands, this is about as big as they get. This is an old growth management area, legally protected OGMA.
Since 2017, wildfires have burned more than 2.1 million hectares across BC's parks, protected areas, old growth reserves, scenic landscapes, and wildlife areas.
They're legally established within BC. There are no harvest zones. We protect them. We don't look at them. We're not allowed to touch them, kind of idea.
We have significant areas set aside for old growth. Over 3 million hectares in the past, and we've added another 2 million hectares. We love these iconic old trees, but we've added them into areas that don't have these huge iconic trees that you would think of. A lot of them are small diameter, 30 centimeter, 40 centimeter type trees.
Fires don't really care if it's an OGMA. Beetles don't care if it's an OGMA. Blowdown doesn't care if it's an OGMA. We know fir is, especially in the dry belt, it's a fire origin stand. Frequency is pretty good. 1 in 20 year frequency, I believe, is what these are listed at. So they're meant to burn somewhat every 20 years. So you won't see them get that much bigger than this. More likely you'll see a fire go through it before it ever gets to be 160 years old. We used to be able to rotate and replace OGMAs on the landscape, but recently they've become much more legalized and entrenched where there's not much we can do with them, even after they burn.
Through photosynthesis, trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it as carbon in their trunks, branches, and roots. This natural process, known as carbon sequestration, is one of the most powerful ways forests help slow climate change.
A real aha moment was 2 successive wildfire seasons we had when large portions of the state had toxic smoke for weeks at a time. My daughter's now 10 years old. Her first experience with a mask was not COVID, but it was 2 wildfire seasons when, in order for her to play outside, she had to wear a mask.
To understand how our actions affect forest emissions, research scientists use carbon modeling software tools that stimulate how forests store and release carbon under different conditions.
My name is Dr. Carolyn Smith, and I'm a research scientist with Natural Resources Canada. My job is to look at ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the forest sector. I do a lot of carbon modeling, and I ask various what-if questions. What if we were to change the way we harvest? What if we were to change the way we use wood? What if we were to change our activities in the forest? How would it change the greenhouse gas emissions? Trees can either absorb or emit carbon. And as trees grow, they capture carbon in the leaves, in the branches, in the trunk, in the woody debris, in the soil, in the roots. Now, when trees die, they can release that carbon. And they can die from being burned, from pests, from storms, from harvesting. We've had bad wildfire seasons in 2017, 2018, 2021, 2023, and now 2024. So in each of those years, roughly 1 million hectares or more has burned. So BC emits around 60 million tons of carbon dioxide every year. And the fire emissions, direct fire emissions, will be roughly twice that value. And not only are the trees burned with the direct emissions, but the trees have died. So they're no longer taking carbon out of the atmosphere until they regrow.
The needles weren't entirely consumed in this fire. These help prevent erosion, and there's a little cone that hopefully will produce some seedlings that will start the reforestation process.
Scientists like Dr. Chuck Bulmer have studied the carbon cost of major wildfires to our soil.
I'm a retired research soil scientist from the BC Forest Service. The soil carbon pool is as big or bigger than the above ground biomass. In a forest, there's a much bigger biomass pool than, for example, in a grassland, but even that pool still would be equaled or exceeded by the soil. The release of carbon after a fire occurs, of course, very quickly. It takes decades, if not centuries, to build up, but it can be lost in a matter of hours. The majority of the loss comes from the forest floor. It's very difficult to heat mineral material like a soil to the point where it will burn carbon. In a high-intensity fire that generates lots of heat, the forest floor would be completely consumed.
In extreme fires, the heat can change the chemistry of the soil itself, creating a thin, invisible layer called a hydrophobic layer that blocks water from soaking into the soil.
So these soils don't wet when that hydrophobic layer is present, and then water will bead up on it. And if that lasts for more than 30 or 40 seconds, that's indicating a strong water repellency. And particularly where slopes are steep, you can have large earth movements, landslides, debris flows, that kind of thing.
Wildfires aren't just destroying forest. They're turning one of our best climate solutions into BC's largest and fastest growing source of emissions.
We're standing on the site of the Sitcombe Creek wildfire, which burned in July 24, just north of Cherryville, British Columbia. This fire was so intense, if you look at the rocks beside me, they're actually cracked from the heat from the wildfire. Amazing amount of heat. Also, you can see that the duff layer or the soil has been totally burnt off of this area. It's just a rock pile now. Trees will not grow back here for probably a century, if at all.
So what we're seeing is that wildfires are becoming more severe and more frequent as a result of climate change. And the projections are that the area burned will increase in the future as climate warms.
With wildfires burning hotter and more often, inaction is no longer an option. By actively managing our forest and aligning policy with modern science-based practice, we can cut carbon emissions and better protect our communities. BC isn't alone. California created a statewide task force that brings together over 450 experts from government, industry, Indigenous groups, and environmentalists.
My name is Wade Crowfoot. I lead the California Natural Resources Agency. So much of what we need to do in California is to learn from these tribal practices.
Catastrophic wildfire threats in California have become somewhat existential. In other words, the fires in 2019, 2020 really called the question, can we actually control catastrophic wildfire, or will large parts of our state be too dangerous to live?
Long before modern firefighting, Indigenous communities across BC used fire not as a threat, but as a tool. Cultural burning has been passed down for generations, a way to reduce fuel, protect communities, and keep forests healthy.
I grew up in the forest, so generally as a young adult growing up, this is what I loved doing and where I love to be. My name's Jim McGrath. I'm a professional forester, have been for the last 22 years, and I've primarily been operating around the Kamloops area. My grandpa was a trapper, born in 1918, And one of the practices that the men in the community used to do on their way out of trapping in the spring is they would light areas on fire on their way out, because they knew in spring, as soon as nightfall came, the majority of their fires would go out. They did a lot of traditional burning to reduce fuel loading, protect their cabins, and those fires would keep the forest clean and healthy.
What we've been doing, it wasn't necessarily wrong, but it didn't work. You know, we had such devastating fires that we know we need to do something different. And the big word is TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. And that's re-implementing the traditional uses in a way using modern practices to be able to manage forests the way that they have been for years before.
I'm really proud that our Governor Newsom signed very recently what is called Senate Bill 310, which is specifically focused on expanding the ability of tribes to conduct cultural fire burns on their original homeland. So we're excited to much more of this.
You know, us tribes are getting together to actually do more of this work as well, and that's on all sides, not just the Tahoe Basin.
In 2024, cultural and prescribed burns were carried out across the province, helping to lower fire risk and restore fire-adapted ecosystems.
Prescribed burns on the forest floor reduce the severity of the next fire. So it is a way to lower the emissions intensity of fires, but it does create carbon emissions from the prescribed burning. So there's a trade-off.
Prescribed fire is only a tool to help reduce risk. So it isn't the silver bullet that is going to solve our problem in BC. However, what it will do is, in the right conditions, it will reduce fuel loading.
Prescribed burns, while vital, are just one part of the solution. To face the wildfire threat head-on, we need forest fuel reduction tools tailored to each landscape to stop wildfires from spreading, especially near communities.
This is a map of wildland-urban fire risk. So the bright orange-red colors are high-risk areas. So if I'm looking right here, this is Kelowna. The black areas are private land, which haven't been assessed. The public land is out here. And so you can see the area around West Kelowna and basically around all of our communities, Penticton down here, high risk or extreme fire risk around these communities.
Forest thinning is a method that can be used to reduce fuels and give firefighters a fighting chance.
Doing treatments to reduce that tons per hectare in and around communities to give us a more defendable space to protect that community if a fire threatens it.
So this would mean changing the spacing of the trees, removing dead woody debris, and pruning lower branches to prevent the fire from jumping from the ground up into the crown. And so by doing that, we can change the severity of the fire.
This fire that we're looking at right now was August last year's fire, so about 8 months ago this fire came through. We're right on the interface with the neighborhood. The stand that we're looking at here was mitigated approximately 5-6 years ago, and within the last 2 weeks it's greened right up, but this was basically all black a couple weeks ago. The key to the survival of all these trees was the removal of the forest fire fuels, the ladder fuels, the dead and dying trees that were in here. You know, these houses, just like in California, there'd be just strips of houses that were gone, neighborhoods gone.
In BC, thinning is still largely done by hand. It's slow, physical work. Cut material is often left behind, piled and burned or mulched. Hauling it out is rare and costly, but near communities, it can give crews the space they need to protect lives and homes. But thinning by hand doesn't come easy across vast, rugged terrain. In the western U.S., some forests are thinned using machines. One common method is mastication, using specialized equipment to grind brush and small trees into mulch right on the forest floor.
We're in the Tahoe National Forest, just west of Truckee, California. We're up on Sugar Bowl Ski Resort. The ski hill is in a very vulnerable location as far as wildfire goes. So what we're doing here is kind of a combined forest health project and a wildfire fuels reduction project. For the understory, which is trees 12 inches and under, we're reducing about 80% of those trees. I'm running through with the Tiger Cat with the new masticating head that came out for it. I'm basically doing the entire understory treatment with that machine solo. It does a really good job of making it disappear and tilling it into the soil so it's not a threat as a ground fill for wildfire. And then for the trees over 12 inches, we're thinning those out to approximately 25-foot spacing.
In high-risk areas near communities, thinning and pruning can only go so far. To truly reduce wildfire risk, some foresters say we need to think bigger, with treatments that actively reshape dense, flammable forest into more resilient ones. Creating healthier, more fire-resilient forest requires actively managing their age, structure, and density.
There is a balance between trees absorbing and emitting carbon. And if they absorb more carbon than they emit, it's a carbon sink. But if they release more carbon than they absorb, it's a carbon source. So the forest can be either a source or a sink, depending on how much harvest or natural disturbances there are.
Harvesting is the only forest management tool that generates revenue. It creates value from the wood we remove, reducing wildfire risk, supporting local jobs, and renewing forest without placing the full cost on taxpayers. In BC, partial harvesting has long been used to improve forest health, lower wildfire risk, and create economic value from the wood that's removed.
So right now we're in close proximity to the city of Kamloops. We're just on the outskirts. We're in an IDF dry belt fir stand. We did a partial harvest here in 2017 and we removed about 50% of the standing volume. And what we're left with is what you see behind us, a mosaic patchwork of dry belt fir that provides multiple values. The goal was to thin the crown, but maintain some visuals, maintain some wildlife habitat, and keep a future crop for the next rotation in about 25 years, hopefully. We found with fir that you need small kind of openings where they can get enough sunlight to grow and enough nutrients, but during the hot summer, they still need a bit of shade. So you'll see some of these little naturals throughout the permit. You look at the crowns of the trees, they're healthy, they're robust, they're green. There's not a lot of forest health issues. If a fire were to come through here, we've done a major fuel reduction and it still provides for a lot of different values. You know, fire, wildlife, got chipmunks running around, mule deer, moose. I think it's something that we're quite proud of in our group.
The results speak for themselves. Healthy trees, strong regeneration, and forests that support both ecological values and renewable resource use.
In areas where, say, this spruce stand we're eating in right now, partial cutting is not effective because you take out half the trees, the other half tend to blow down because of small root systems. And we write fire hazard reduction prescriptions. And that's as far as it's getting, unfortunately. We're not thinking about how we're building a resilient forest ecosystem in the long term. Those things aren't quite happening yet, and we need to get there as fast as we can.
Since the 1970s, British Columbia has responded to mountain pine beetle outbreaks with salvage logging, recovering economic value while reducing fire risk in beetle-killed forest. As a result, millions of hectares have been reforested with younger, healthy trees. These forests now hold enormous potential for commercial thinning.
We're in the Peachland area. Mountain pine beetle attacked it about 45 years ago, and this whole area had been logged. Now we're doing a thinning after about 45 years. All the trees we were cutting go to various sites. It's 100% being used, either for pulp and paper or post and rail or lumber. When we had the mountain pine beetle, it was huge. Our whole province turned red. It was bad. This is the result of it. It's totally green now. This is one great big giant carbon sink right here, right now. And it can be like this forever if we manage it properly.
As the forest matures, these stands are typically revisited through regeneration harvesting, removing the older trees to make way for a new, healthy forest. Professionally planned harvesting, followed by planting, plays a critical role in reducing wildfire risk in BC's forest. Regeneration harvesting replaces overmature or damaged stands with young, diverse forests that are better adapted to future climate conditions. This approach creates a mosaic across the landscape, disrupting continuous fuels and making wildfires less intense, more predictable, and easier to manage at scale.
When we have a managed disturbance on the landscape, for example, forest harvesting, it is reviewed by a whole series of professionals, including biologists. What are going to be the impacts on wildlife? Hydrologists, what's the impact on water? So we're able to manage that disturbance to minimize the impacts to all these things or enhance it. Whereas if we have a mega fire, we don't control when it happens and the consequences, and they can be significant. We're standing on the site of the 2003 Okanagan Mountain Park fire. This fire took place 22 years ago and burnt 239 homes. And you can see, looking around the area, 22 years later, trees have still not grown back in any significant way. Now we're standing in a forest that was regeneration harvested 2 years after the Okanagan Mountain Park fire. You can see it was planted, and it has a wide variety of species: Douglas fir, larch, spruce, and there's birch coming back as well. It's a beautiful forest. You can hear the birds chirping, and it's great to see. Here we are north of Lumby, British Columbia, just beside Maple Lake. This area had extensive harvesting in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and a real mosaic of a landscape. And in 2021, a wildfire went through this area. And what is really interesting to see is the areas that were harvested and reforested did not burn and acted as a buffer and a means to slow that fire down.
Harvesting doesn't just reduce fire risk. It stores carbon into lumber and engineered wood products like mass timber, storing it in buildings and structures that last for generations. Advances in technology mean even bark, branches, and wood waste that don't make lumber can be put to use. Much of it becomes bioenergy, replacing fossil fuels and making the most of every tree, including those too damaged for traditional wood products.
So fire ecologists talk about the amount of fuel a fire has. So excess dead trees, woody debris, taking that out of the forest. From a carbon perspective, you really want to use that for wood product or bioenergy and avoid fossil fuel burning. So you don't want to burn the dead wood in the forest, but you want to take it out and use it.
Bioenergy powers mills, heats buildings, and feeds electricity back into the grid. It's one more way to get value from the forest while lowering wildfire risk and cutting carbon pollution. In 2023, wildfires scorched an area in BC 20 times larger than what was sustainably harvested. Sustainable harvesting through thinning, partial cutting, or regeneration harvesting is a science-based, long-term strategy to reduce wildfire risk, support biodiversity, store carbon, and protect communities. When wildfire burns a forest, it takes more than trees. It erases habitat, releases decades of stored carbon, and leaves behind silence.
So after a fire, it can take time for the carbon stocks to recover. And the time depends on the forest and how quickly it grows and how severe the fire was. But we can look at stand replacing fires across the country. And in some areas, it can regrow in as little as 50 years. So the Atlantic Maritime, for example, has a lot of hardwoods that regrow quickly, and that carbon can rebound. Up north, it cycles a little more slowly, and it can take 100 years for forest carbon stocks to recover. And in BC, it's probably in between, so it's around 70 years or so in the interior of BC for the forest carbon stocks to recover after a wildfire.
But for all of its benefits, regeneration harvesting often draws attention. But what goes unseen is the decades of strategy that follow, replanting, monitoring, and building forests that outlast us.
It's exciting to go back and see the areas that we developed and see them now. You know, the initial impact of forest harvesting doesn't always look pretty. You go back now and see a thriving forest, that's pretty nice. it doesn't look pretty when it first happens. And I think that sets off a bad initial reaction on harvesting. But really, it's just one step in a series of successional stages as the forest regenerates. So to see those first couple of years is tough for people to get by, but if you can look ahead and see forest in a variety of stages, you see this stage behind us right now, a 30-year-old forest that's thriving, very diverse. It's exciting.
As forests grow, they pull carbon from the atmosphere. As they mature, they support wildfire resilience, sustainable jobs, and renewable wood products. Planted with purpose, these forests are part of a century-long strategy, one that helps defend future communities and landscapes from the growing threat of wildfires.
I think back at this area, being here 35 years ago, I remember I had my young dog, my golden retriever, Logan, with me, and we spent several months working in this area. I really enjoyed it. Very excited to be back here today looking at it again.
This is what real climate action looks like: restoring the land, renewing forest, and growing value for generations to come. It's about building resilient landscapes, ready to thrive in a hotter, drier future.
I think one of the biggest myths is that after forest harvesting takes place, forest companies or government doesn't reforest the areas. That's simply wrong. We're planting over 200 million trees a year in this province. Those new trees are creating new forest and storing carbon, and it's just fantastic.
Over the past 20 years, BC has planted 4.5 billion trees, most of them in harvested areas, to grow forest for the future.
Indigenous values in this type of projects are very important. We need to help Mother Nature. We need to get the land, back up and growing, producing resilient forest stands.
But harvesting BC is in decline. Thousands of forest sector jobs have been lost as sawmills go quiet, pulp mills shut down, and logging companies close their doors. Now wildfires are burning more area than we harvest each year. And without action, that gap will only grow.
2017, we were logging about 62 million meters a year. We're now around 30 million meters. So we've significantly dropped the harvest level, which means less area is being harvested. If we continue to lose our forest sector, fire resilience will cost us all more money.
California has been living with this crisis for years, facing some of the most destructive wildfires in U.S. history.
For so long in California, a lot of our residents thought the way that you took care of a forest is to leave it alone, is not to actively manage it. I think our real aha moment was 2 successive wildfire seasons we had when large portions of the state had toxic smoke for weeks at a time. So I think everybody understood that unless we get our hands around this catastrophic wildfire crisis, our lives, our kids' lives are going to be impacted. So we've learned a lot, and a lot of environmental groups have fundamentally shifted towards more active management in our forests.
California has had effective fire suppression for well over 140 years. We have effectively provided fuel loading for 140 years across California. That fuel loading needs to be removed in order to reduce that risk and danger of catastrophic wildfire.
The management that we need to do in our forests needs to be ecologically based. So we're not suggesting that all forms of timber production are that ecologically based forest management. But we do know, and the science demonstrates, that being active in the forest through reducing vegetation densities, through prescribed fire, through that proactive management is actually beneficial.
Just a decade ago, practices like increasing harvesting, increasing grazing, thinning, prescribed burning, and cultural fires were highly controversial. But in 2021, California adopted the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Action Plan, a bold shift toward proactive forest management, wildfire risk reduction, and rural economic support.
And we have funded millions of dollars in projects across California through our tribal wildfire resilience grants, our fuel reduction grants, our wildfire prevention grants, and our forest health grants programs within CAL FIRE. And so we are seeing a difference in the effectiveness of our fuel treatments.
We have great urgency in California to try to align the efforts of all the different agencies, federal, state, and local, that are working on community resilience. So instead of having 5 siloed efforts, you've got one collective effort where they're all working together, sharing resources, sharing workforce, and really sharing responsibility and accountability for getting the job done.
We have to move with this pace and scale to counter that threat. And what it means is we have to hold ourselves accountable for not doing a project here or a project there, but working at scale.
Progress is well underway. Hundreds of thousands of hectares have been treated with every step tracked on a public dashboard. But as forest management ramps up, California faces a new challenge: what to do with all the material being removed.
We're trying our best to try to rebuild back our forest products industry, because as we increase the space and scale of work, we're going to need to take that material so it can be put to beneficial use. So we're trying to do everything we can to send that material to wood products facilities or bioenergy facilities so that we can get an additional benefit out of them and avoid the smoke impacts and air quality impacts that are associated with pile burning.
In 2023, the first new sawmill in the region in nearly a century opened in Carson City, Nevada, a partnership between private investors and the Washoe tribe. Built with urgency and purpose, the Tahoe Forest Products Mill is turning material from forest thinning products and wildfires into high-value products that would otherwise go to waste.
This idea was brought to us about 4 years ago now, and the idea behind it was that because of mega fire that have now burned millions of acres in California, the political will, the public awareness, the funding has finally arrived to do something about our forests, which over the past 40 years have become completely unhealthy and overstocked. In the early 1980s, there were maybe 250 sawmills in California. Today, there might be 15 or 20. We're the first new sawmill in probably 100 years. We built this facility hoping that our friends in the Forest Service got serious about their commitments to reducing fuel loads and to sending wood to our facility. And so far, that has been the case.
They've lost their forest industry, so they have no place to sell the product. So everything is just a straight expense. And so we need to learn from that. We need to expand our forest sector so that we have some place to reduce the fire risk and not spend all of our money on suppression.
The world is run by those who show up. And right now, our forests, our communities, and our future need you to show up. We need to dramatically increase the pace and scale of forest management across the landscape and around our communities to reduce wildfire risks. We need to include wildfire emissions in BC's and Canada's climate targets, because what we don't measure, we can't fix. And we need a clear science-based plan with measurable goals to restore forest health and reduce the risk of catastrophic fires.
We need to go back and treat the wildfire situation like the mountain pine beetle infestation. We need to treat it the same way and increase our harvest levels to address the fire risk. And some of that might have to be funded, because if we're spending $1 billion in 2023 fighting fires, we need to put some of that money into the upfront side of it.
We've had reports, we've had reviews. What we haven't had is full-scale action. Because the forest doesn't belong to someone else. It belongs to all of us. And what we do or don't do will define the next century.
Really the biggest thing for me, it's around adapting the way that we look at forest landscape management in this province. We actually need to look at it from a landscape level approach.
We are excited to share what's working in California and where we've made mistakes. We have to work together across borders because these threats don't know borders.
Create mosaics. Manage throughout the life of a stand. Have a mosaic of age classes on the landscape, of species on the landscape, and throughout the life of the stand, do thinning or intermediate cutting, because we're always going to have insects, we're always going to have outbreaks.
I'm of the opinion that some of our policies that we write and some of our rules, regulations, procedures start hindering our ability to accomplish the goals to which we would like to achieve.
What we're doing right now isn't working. We are losing 1% of the province a year to fires. We're spending last year almost $1 billion to just try and suppress these fires and still have record losses. We have to change what we're doing.
So I just think if we're serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, if we're serious about making our communities safe, and we're serious about reducing wildfires, then we need to get serious about actively managing our forests at a larger scale.
Policy drives outcomes. Your voice drives policy. To learn more and take action, visit bcisburning.ca.
Thank you.